the damaging impact of taxes altogether, but by dramatically lowering rates and ending the tax code's bias against savings and investment, it will boost our economy's performance, especially when compared to the present tax code. And I think, Dr. Burgess, my dear colleague, if you look where flat taxes have been instituted, you've seen GDP growth in those countries. So what holds us back from doing something that is just common sense?
Yeah, the country of Estonia was a case in point a few years ago when they reported on their experience with the flat tax. I think this is a good system, but you know what? I am willing to admit to you that I do not know the best for every family in America. Some people would criticize this system as saying, well, wait a minute. I need that income tax deduction for my home mortgage. I need that income tax deduction for charitable deductions. That may be right, but I do know this. You should have the option of saying, I accept a single flat rate tax and I'm going to give up those other deductions, but it should be your option. It should not be the United States Congress dictating each and every American what they shall and shall not do. If you have constructed your life by living around the IRS code, then you should be able to continue doing that. If that is the reason by which you've made economic decisions in your life, you should be able to live by those decisions. Congress should not be disruptive in this process. I personally would give up all of the itemized deductions that I keep in order to get rid of having to keep up with those itemized deductions. Would I still give money to charity? Absolutely. Would I still turn stuff over to the Salvation Army and Goodwill? Absolutely. It's no fun keeping up with those things and then having to report them to my accountant, and I always worry that I've left something off and I'm not getting all that's owed to me off of my income tax return. I would so much rather have a system that was simple, that within a few hours every spring I could be done. The United States gets its money, I get the satisfaction of knowing I've done it correctly, and I'm not going to jail for some perceived misconstruction on the tax code, and that no one else has gotten a better deal than I did because they were more clever about how they declared those charitable deductions, for example. Let me give you an example of the mortgage tax deduction, because I do have a lot of friends who are in the real estate business, and they're concerned about losing that home mortgage deduction. It's one of the things on which, one of the bedrocks on which the economy has been built over the years. If you have invested in a starter castle in California and your house payments are largely interest and not much principal, you probably don't want to do this because that number is likely very high. But if you live in Fort Worth, San Antonio, Texas, where the average home mortgage is much, much smaller, if you do the numbers, if you run the numbers, you'll find that the amount of money you actually get to keep from that mortgage income tax deduction is actually fairly modest. I would give that up in a heartbeat to be out from under the tyranny of the shoebox full of receipts. But I fully understand how some families have made the decision, a home's a pretty important investment. After all, I get to write off the cost of the mortgage home deduction, so I will make this investment in this size of a home. It would be wrong for the United States Congress to say, as of next year, you don't get to do that anymore. The real estate market has already suffered, and it would suffer worse if Congress were to make a sudden decision like that. So make it optional. You can either stay in the code and keep doing what you've been doing, or you can evolve and come into the promised land of a flat tax and give up that shoebox full of receipts. But the important thing here is it's your choice. It's your option. Now, I will say that once you opt into the flat tax, you can't go back and forth into the code and out of the code depending upon what kind of year you have or what kind of investments you make. Once you make the decision to go into the flat tax, there you'll stay. I fully believe that even though some people might not do as well under a flat tax system, because it is so much simpler and because it returns time to their lives, they will opt for this. And as a consequence, we will see the number of people participating in the IRS code dwindle down to an ever small number until one day it just vanishes under its own weight and the country is completely freed from the tyranny of the IRS code. I'll yield to my friend from Florida.
You're absolutely right. I think the most important thing we have to come to understand is that this time belongs to the American people. The resources, the money, belongs to the American people. Let's give them the option to do what is best for them in their lives. the option of going to a flat tax or staying in the current progressive tax code system, the options of mortgage interest tax deduction, child tax credit, charitable contributions, as we reduce those deductions. But let's start treating the American people as adults. But the key thing that has to accompany this is we have to reduce the size and scope of government as well. Because as we start to focus more so on Main Street, as we start to focus more so on the hard-working American taxpayer and what's best for them, then we can have that investment at their level. We can have the growth at their level. You know, one of the things that really does trouble me when you drive around in Washington, D.C., you see a lot of construction cranes. Business is good up here, which means that there's less in the pockets of the hard-working American worker. There's less in the pockets of that small business owner. And this is the means by which we unlock that entrepreneurial spirit that will grow this economy. So that's why I hope that in this Congress, which is one of the reasons why I came here, we do those big reforms that show the American people that we're serious about turning this economy around. We're serious about creating the right type of policies that set the conditions for job creation. I yield back to my colleague.
Well, our time here is almost concluded. The gentleman is exactly right. All of the improvements in the tax code really become meaningless if we don't reduce the size and scope and the footprint of the federal government. You're right about the cranes that are all over town, but after those buildings are built, let's be honest, the money invested in the federal government doesn't really produce all that much, does it? We don't make things here during the day other than laws and regulations that interfere with other people's lives. We need to have this government smaller and more manageable. And we talk a lot about transparency, and I think transparency is good, but the problem is you have something that is so complex like the IRS code, and even though you may have the ability to look inside it, you won't know what you're finding when you get there. If you have a system that's as simple as this, people would be able to know what their government is costing them, what they are getting from that, that bond with the government, and if they didn't like that equation, they could change. They could change their member of Congress, they could change their senator, they could change their president. That's the beauty in living in the representational republic that we all know and love here in the United States of America, and the thing that arguably has made us great. Government with the consent of the governed, and wouldn't it be great if that governed knew just exactly what it was costing them, and then perhaps they could find out where those dollars were going. Now, I mentioned earlier Budget Committee Paul Ryan. He's called for broadening the base and lowering the rates. Obviously, I want to work together with him. Ways and Means Chairman David Camp has promoted the simplification of the tax code. The President himself, through the Bowles-Simpson Commission, talked about it. Whatever the tax proposals we look to in the future, we need to remember that a system could be less costly. A flat tax could be less costly, saving the taxpayer over $160 billion a year, reduced tax compliance costs by over 90%, and the resulting increase in personal savings. Here you go. How about a debt-free stimulus package, a gift to the American people that could have an immediate effect on the American economy? American Solutions looked into this question. 2009, 80% of Americans favor an optional one-page tax form with a single rate. Who could complain about making something easier? And we got 70,000 pages of the tax code and more on the way this December when we get through with the so-called lame duck session, which I don't know about you, Mr. West, but scares me half to death to think about what's coming at the end of this year. The current process comes at a cost that's way too high for the American people and costs way too much time. I yield to my friend for any closing comments.
Thank you so much to my colleague from Texas, Dr. Burgess. And I think that the seminal argument is this. We're talking about economic freedom for the American people as opposed to economic dependency upon government. And this incredible, exorbitant system that we have that is complex to the point where it is causing more pain for the American people than causing them to have the freedom that they deserve. And I want to thank my colleague for allowing me to participate in this special order with him.
And Mr. Speaker, of course, I know I must direct my comments to you. April 17th is coming up. It's rapidly approaching. I know people are focusing and will begin to focus more and more on this issue for what remains in the month of March and the first couple of weeks of April, because they'll be having to arrange their own taxes, deal with their own shoeboxes full of receipts. This is the time to make the point that it is time to return time and money to the American people. Let's get behind a flat tax. And I'll yield back the balance of the time.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. It's an honor to be here tonight to speak out for women across America who rely on contraception for their health and well-being. I want to emphasize the word health because at its heart, that's what this debate is all about. There's been a great deal of discussion about religion in the debate, but we want to use tonight to remind policymakers and Americans everywhere what's really at stake when we talk about contraception, and that's the health and well-being of millions of women and their families. 99% of sexually active women have used contraception, including 98% of sexually active Catholic women. More than half of women between the ages of 18 and 34 have struggled to afford contraception. It's also important to recognize 28 states already require contraception coverage, and 57% of Catholic voters support the new policy requiring contraception coverage. But today we want to move beyond statistics and tell human stories. The stories of women all across America who rely on contraception for a variety of vital health needs. Tonight I want to share just one of many stories I have received from women in my district. The story I want to share is from a young woman in my district in Chicago named Annalisa. Annalisa was so moved by the story of the young woman from Georgetown who was denied contraception to treat her ovarian cyst. She wrote me this letter, quote, "I would like to applaud your decision to walk out of the one-sided talk about birth control coverage. I have a similar story to that of the rejected witness's friend. I had my right ovary removed shortly after I turned 18 due to a large cyst that not only threatened my fertility, but I was told if it grew any larger, it could burst and also threaten my life. My left ovary also had multiple smaller cysts, but they were able to be removed while leaving the ovary intact. My doctor said that I was one of the youngest with such a problem, and the cyst was so large it was to be sent to be researched. Before I was even sexually active, I was prescribed birth control pills to preserve my remaining ovary and to take my fertility beyond the age of 18. It saddens me to no end that some people don't understand the many uses and life-saving abilities of birth control. I hope to be a mother someday," she writes, "a darn good one, and I thank you for standing up for women like me," end of quote. Well, I want to thank Annalisa for her bravery in sharing her story with me and allowing me to share it tonight. But Annalisa is not alone. Her story is the story of thousands of women around the country whose health relies on contraception. We will hear more stories like Annalisa's tonight. But I hope that the next time we engage in a debate about restricting access to contraception, we remember Annalisa and women like her, and that we remember that for thousands of women, contraception is not a question of religion, but a question of life and death. In addition to non-contraception health benefits, the contraception benefits of birth control cannot be understated. The simple fact is, millions of women use birth control to delay or avoid pregnancy. According to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, quote, "A full array of family planning services is vital for women's health, especially for the two-thirds of American women of reproductive age who wish to avoid or postpone pregnancy. Nearly half of all pregnancies in the U.S. are unintended, and unintended pregnancies can have serious health consequences for women. For example, for some women with serious medical conditions, such as heart disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure, a pregnancy can be life-threatening. Children born from unintended pregnancies are also at greater risk of poor birth outcomes, such as congenital defects, low birth weight, and prematurity. According to the National Commission to Prevent Infant Mortality, 10% of infant deaths could be prevented if all pregnancies were planned. I want to share another story of a young woman named Katie from my home state of Illinois. Katie, like millions of women across the country, currently relies on contraception because she is pursuing her career and wants to do so without getting pregnant. Here's what Katie wrote, quote, "Birth control is important to me personally because I am a 23-year-old medical student that would be distraught if I became pregnant. Don't get me wrong, I love children and dream of the day that I can become a mother," she writes, "but that time isn't now. That time isn't when I have $81,000 in medical school debt after just 2 years of medical school. That time isn't when I study for most hours of the day. That time isn't when I have no job and my only source of, quote, income is the overpayment checks I receive from my financial aid. Birth control is important to me because I can't be a mother right now, but I want to have the option in the future. Birth control gives me the option to retain a somewhat normal, intimate life with my partner of 8 years while still protecting my dreams of a future in medicine. That future would be extremely hard to obtain with an infant to care for." End of quote. Contraception has transformed our society by allowing women like Katie to take their own health and their own future into their own hands. Women have the power to decide when and how many children to have, which has allowed them to pursue successful careers and enter the workforce like never before. But in the end, this is not about work versus home life. This is about empowering women to decide for themselves. Birth control lets women choose their own life's path, and that's why it's vital that we protect it. I also want to remind opponents of contraception coverage that contraceptions prevent abortion. Nearly half, 49% of pregnancies in the U.S. are unintended, and 42% of unintended pregnancies end in abortion. Although abortion and contraception are 1 degree removed, it is easy to see that increased use of contraception will reduce unintended pregnancies and therefore reduce abortion rates. The data show this up as well. According to a study published in the American Journal of Public Health, the recent decline in pregnancy rates amongst American teens, quote, appears to be following the patterns observed in other developed countries, where improved contraception use has been the primary determinant of declining rates. Teen pregnancy is at a 30-year low, due in large part to increased contraception use. Another recent study found that California's family planning program averted nearly 300,000 unintended pregnancies, 100,000 abortions, and 38,000 miscarriages. Finally, a Guttmacher Institute study of nationwide family planning programs found similar results. According to Guttmacher, quote, publicly funded contraception services and supplies help women in the U.S. avoid nearly 2 million unintended pregnancies each year. Quote, in the absence of such services from family planning centers and from doctors serving Medicaid patients, estimated U.S. levels of unintended pregnancy, abortion, and unintended birth would be nearly 2/3 higher among women overall, and nearly twice as high among poor women. End of quote. There can be no denying that contraception prevents abortion. This means abortion opponents should be bolstering contraception programs, not banning them. We should be able to find common ground on the issue of contraception, a basic health service already utilized by the vast majority of American women. I hope we can work together to expand important investments in family planning such as Title X and Medicaid. And I hope we can move forward with the new the important new rule requiring coverage of contraception to empower women, improve health, save lives, and reduce abortions. Mr. Speaker, I now yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Oh, I just want to get in the right order. Sure. Thanks. Have a good night now.
Okay to go ahead?
Was he on the schedule to come down?
I'm sorry? Okay. Well, just so he can't have any say with disadvantage for wait 30 more seconds.
That happened in the past.
Yes. You're not poison the trail here. I'm going to ask you now for a motion, all right?
Okay.
Chair would be pleased to entertain a motion from the gentleman from Illinois.
The chair would be pleased to entertain a motion from the gentleman from Illinois.
I move we adjourn, Mr. Speaker.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.